And so a lot of times people can really be threats and not make it really obvious. So they're not like, doing Mr. Burns fingers, and they're not doing anything like, but you see it, and if somebody can actually recognize, this person's acting like a bad person, and can say that out loud, a lot of times that will feel like you're the person who drew the gun first.
My guest this week is Wade Stotts, and he's the host of The Wade Show with Wade on Canon Plus and YouTube. You may have heard of Wade recently because a video he did on the untimely death of the Constitution went viral and was featured everywhere from Alex Jones to Tim Pool. That's right, the upper echelons of American politics were fully Wade-maxing, a daily practice I recommend. But like all overnight successes, there's nothing overnight about it. As you'll hear in this podcast, Wade has been studying political comedy for years, observing late-night television, Weekend Update, Norm Macdonald, Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, and many others. You might call Wade obsessed, but thankfully a jury hasn't. At least not yet. But that means Wade can articulate the things that he's learned, and lend insight to the world of comedy and comedic writing, which surrounds us all to such a degree we're hardly aware of it. And in this way, Wade's enthusiasm illuminated a whole field of study, because we could have talked about that dead old Constitution, and in the process we could have made more conservatives even angrier as they clapped their hands, hoping to revive our rule of law as if our founding document were a dying Tinkerbell. But see, right there, I've already told you everything that you need to know about Wade's viral video. So instead, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Wade, where he shares things you might not know, so we can all enjoy his enthusiasm, curiosity, and passion for comedy together. Because those kinds of conversations are my obsession. See how that all works out? In our conversation, Wade and I discussed Jon Stewart's innovation and Stephen Colbert's boring sincerity, when comedy becomes self-important, why Wall-E is a right-wing robot, how conservatives haven't conserved conservatism, Wade's objectives for The Wade Show, the essence of comedy writing, the naïveté of modern Christians, and calculated nastiness masquerading as winsomeness. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Please like this video, share it, and subscribe. Plus, leave a comment down below letting us know what you thought. Also, big changes are coming for this podcast very soon. You can get a head start on them by visiting my new Substack at willspencerpod.substack.com. This is a new site with some features that are only available to paying subscribers, including exclusive uncensored episodes and much more. Subscriptions begin at just $10 per month. So hit the link in the show notes and subscribe to the new Will Spencer Podcast Substack now. And please welcome this week's guest on the podcast, from The Wade Show with Wade on Canon Plus, Wade Stotts. Wade, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast this week.
So glad to be here. Thank you, Will.
I've been a huge fan of your content, of The Wade Show, for the past few months that I've been watching it for many reasons. But one of the big reasons is because when I was still a liberal about a decade or so ago, I was a big fan of Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert. And to see, and obviously I don't agree with any of their politics anymore at all, and I can't believe that I ever did, but to see you doing something like that today in the Christian counterculture has been incredibly exciting for me. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. I love doing it. I have a similar sort of experience with having watched a lot of those guys. I was a late night fiend back in the day, but yeah, I love being able to do the Wade Show and every week being able to tell people, do a format that I really love and be able to talk about things I care about and not whatever those guys care about. You know?
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because I think there was a moment where like comedy TV news, like Comedy Central kind of stuff, actually was kind of news. Right. Yeah. I mean, at least it seemed that way to me, or maybe I was asleep. I mean, was that what was going on, or did they change, or was I wrong?
The question is, were they news back in the day?
I mean, yes, of course they have a bias, like setting that aside, but I don't think they're the same anymore.
Right. Well, they were definitely, that was definitely Jon Stewart's innovation in the whole late night space. So the Daily Show before he took over was basically a parody of the news. And so they would do like sort of goofy jokes about like, here's a, squirrel on a, jet ski or whatever, and like just make it into like this is a parody of the local news, and this is our parody of the sports guy, and this is our parody of that. But what it became during Jon Stewart's tenure, and especially after after Bush came into office, was a kind of point by point breakdown of some happening of that day. And so, yeah, it became a center. I think there was a survey that happened sometime within, I think Jon Stewart was there for 10 years or something. Sometime within there was a huge portion of young people that saw him as their top news source. They weren't getting news anywhere else. So you could walk away from a Jon Stewart segment feeling like you have digested the news of the day, when really you've just listened to a 10-minute comedy monologue. And so it really was going through details. But there was, the slant was always there, and Stewart and Colbert had their very different kind of paths for it. But yeah, that was a huge innovation in that space around the turn of the century, for those guys. Cause mostly late night TV was, it was topical because they have to do a show every night, and the jokes are going to be, you have to have new material. You're not just going to every night try to come up with some new observation about, like, when you're eating a hot dog and you're like, whatever, kind of like Seinfeld kind of thing. So like the comedy had to be topical, but those guys turned it into, here is the way you should be thinking about the news, which puts a lot of power in their hands. And folks followed them because they were very funny, and because and so a lot of times that skill of comedy writing, which is a skill, can make you swallow the underlying premises. And so it's all about subtext. And so whatever if the text is done skillfully, and they've gotten you to laugh at the people they want you to laugh at for whatever reason, then you go along with it. So you don't ever, it's kind of like public school. I went to public school, but like, it's kind of like public school where you walk away from it feeling like you've learned about World War II, or you feel like you've learned about the Civil War, or you feel like you've learned about Vietnam War, and you've got like maybe a paragraph worth of information in your head. But what you've got is a story that is very, like, again, it's sort of summarized, easy to summarize, easy to like spit out, but you haven't gone through and done a lot of the work. So you haven't learned how to learn. You've just kind of been handed, I feel like I know a lot about X. And so you get like people of my generation, the millennials, walking around assuming that they know quite a bit more than they actually do, because that's the way they've learned how to learn. It's just sort of give me the bullet points, and I won't have to dig any further because, well, Jon Stewart summarized it for me, or I went to college and I feel like I know a lot about history. But really it was just a process of, I don't know. Yeah. It's like instilling a certain amount of like unearned confidence. And I think the entertainment does that. I think education does that. And I hope not to do that in my show, mainly because I hope to like cite my sources and like force people to do work outside of my 5 to 10 minute little excursions. But yeah, I love the format, and I love the potency of it, and I can see how potent it is to be able to change people's minds. But I also it's a fun, entertaining way to do the kind of communication I want to do.
Well, actually, I want to come back to Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert in a minute, but since you mentioned it, I'm curious about what does go into producing your monologues, because I can feel it now as you articulate. This is what I create, and the ethic behind what I create. Like, you're not just trying to pre-digest information and hand it to people so that they believe it, right? In terms of like, you just accept this unearned confidence, as you said, in information you have no background in, like, oh, well, Jon Stewart said it, so therefore it must be true, versus the idea that citing your sources or putting forth something that isn't necessarily designed to tell people how to think, it's designed to make them think. Is that about right?
Yeah. And my hope is, like, as far as the, what Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert would do, they would do a joke and make you dislike Rand Paul because his hair was weird, So like, I find myself every time I see Rand Paul on the TV, because I watch this. There are still jokes from Stephen Colbert that stick in my head, where like I think there's one particular joke about somebody had like 0.5% in polling, and then it said like, or as they know in the poll, or they call it in the polling world, one Santorum. And I was like, that's a great joke. And like it always, like Rick Santorum, no, I liked Rick Santorum, so it's no knock on him, but I always have that in my head as like a little bit of a, like, I don't know, like a mini denigration of this guy that I actually do respect. But anyway, I think there's a potency in it, and so like you said, what I try to do is push people, but also like encourage people who are already kind of suspecting something. So I think the videos that have done the best on the channel have been typically ones that you may sort of that have the common factor of you've probably been feeling a kind of cloud of X that sort of feels like a big cloud of undefined anxiety about X topic. Well, here's a case that might provide some clarity for that cloud, and so that somebody out there might be able to go, oh, that's it. That's the thing I've been saying, but I haven't exactly had words for it. I've heard Pastor Doug Wilson, talk about his ideal audience is a young Reformed man in a church who doesn't have words to describe the chaos he sees around him. And then when he reads Doug, for him to go, that's it. That's what I've been seeing. And so I've got a similar kind of presentation thing. And so a lot of that is just trying to clarify things that seem unclear. And so we've got... I've admired a lot of folks who've been able to do that kind of translation work. But honestly, like along with that, the whole time, I want it to be entertaining. So in one sense, I see it as like, oh, I want to clarify. It's stuff I care about, so I want to talk about it. And it also, so in one sense, it helps me get my thinking straight on some particular issue. Because I've said it before that, like, I've heard it many, many times, but writing is thinking. And so when I'm writing my thing, it's me just trying to explain it to myself. And if I can get me on the page, then I'm pretty good. Like if I can explain it to where I can understand it, then hopefully other folks can come along and grab on as well. But yeah, that's the kind of encouraging side, and then entertaining side. I want it to be something that's pleasant to watch, no matter what the topic is. We get into some pretty depressing, sad kind of stuff on the show. But I mean, I'm talking bad about the late night guys, but they actually do a pretty decent job of that. If they're going somewhere that they think of as dark, and they're going to make a case that I'm going to disagree with, but they go there and they go into a dark place, and they're like, we can still have our humanity intact even as we go into kind of a dark, weird place. And that's what, I mean, comedy is really great for that. Some of the best stand-ups can like pull you along, and like they can do that in a subversive way, or they can do that in a positive way and like pull you along and try to make a point that you wouldn't have agreed with otherwise, but like start by pulling you in, getting you to trust them, and then saying, hey, we can still have fun here. We're still having fun in this uncomfortable, weird spot. So that's the thinking behind what I'm doing. But hopefully if people watch it, they don't have to really like dissect what my thought is behind it, but that is what it is, kind of behind the scenes. Yeah.
I remember before Stephen Colbert became a late night guy, when he was sort of Jon Stewart's, the companion show.
Yeah.
And he was kind of doing a character, like a skit. Like he was doing he was doing like a Fox News kind of character, right? And so a lot of people probably might not remember pre-COVID Stephen Colbert or pre-network television Stephen Colbert. Like he was a completely different guy. And so the gag between Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert was like MSNBC and Fox News. And there was a way in which it was like really entertaining to engage with that. Yes, of course, hard liberal slant, caricaturizations, all of that. But I felt like I walked away at least entertained. And now it feels like there's a lot less of that entertainment that's happening. Now it feels like I'm going to lead with the slant, and then if you happen to laugh, cool, but I'll take some applause instead.
Yeah. Well, it turned out that Stephen Colbert, sincere, is really boring. Just like a really boring guy. He may have all the same talents. He may be able to do all the same little like cool, funny motions or do the voices and all that kind of stuff. But like without that layer of irony, he just doesn't have much going on. And I liked the old show. I thought it was really well done. The idea that somebody could do a character for 10 years every night for 30 minutes and stick to it was amazing, like an amazing feat of entertainment. And so yeah, like it goes back into the skill. There really has been a change in recent years, and I think the Colbert change was much more of a was in a lot of ways a format change, in that he had to drop one of the things that made the show funny. So even if he were expressing his sincere and dumb opinion about something, it was always he was expressing it the opposite way, which automatically turned everything into a joke. So that it had one, like if there was a funny joke, then the layer of irony on top of it made it a double funny joke. And so the more layers of that, the funnier he's going to come off being. But if you take off that layer of irony, you get less, and then each one of those jokes gets evaluated based on its own merits, and not through the character filter. So I think that has a lot to do with it. There was also the huge I mean, you talked about pre-network Colbert. He was such a he came on to network TV around the same time that a lot of other shows changed hands. And so this was all like 2014, 2015, where like Seth Meyers got a show, and Seth Meyers is very much like straight to camera. Here's my opinion, jokes, weaved into it. And before like when I think of late night, when I think of the 12:30 NBC slot, I think of Conan O'Brien, and which is a very different show, not the kind of like, again, sincere political, like begging the audience to take the Trump trial seriously or whatever. But it was like much more silly, goofy, people in horse costumes. And that's my, like, I love that era of late night. But yeah, like, and then Letterman left. Conan was still doing his thing on TBS. Craig Ferguson left at the end of 2014. So a lot of these guys who were less political, it passed off the shows around the time when the world got more political. And so it's odd that it happened at the same time that these shows were handed to more political people as like Negative World started. So like Aaron Renn's Negative World, 2015, Obergefell, that's about the time that Letterman left his show, and about the time that Colbert took it over, and about the time like all these other late night shows were happening. So when we think back on a period of late night that I liked a lot, we typically think about a time that is basically neutral world in Aaron Renn's scheme. But so I think there's part of it was late night itself and these people and the talent, but a lot of them were also following. So Colbert changed into the sincere character, or away from the Fox News character, around that same time. And I think, for some reason that's fascinating to me. And late night itself, losing a lot of its prominence, but also becoming much more shrill, becoming much more preachy, around the time everybody else did. So you can say Trump did it, but it was also that all of the like pieces were on the board before Trump came in as a political figure. So like they did a year of Seth Meyers on NBC before this whole thing came out. And then now, of course, everything is about Trump. So he becomes the face of, oh, Trump must have changed late night. But it was these guys who didn't really have anything until Trump came along. So they were all like, they're all making a show for a year trying to figure out what they are. And then all of a sudden, hey, now I know it's going to be this, it's going to be the orange guy. But yeah, I'm getting off on a huge late night tangent because I love this stuff.
No, this is great because one of the things that we all live in every day is we live in a world of television, comedy, but it's one of those things that it's kind of opaque, right? The art of comedy, you might say the science of comedy, the people behind the scenes, how it all comes together is something that's kind of invisible to a lot of people. Like we consume the product of it, of writing staffs and teams and decades long careers, but we don't ever see how the sausage get made, because if you look at it, like it makes the jokes not funny. So this kind of stuff really helps surface a whole world that most of us will never get a chance to experience. So by all means, please and go crazy.
I am. That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Man. Okay. So let me ask then. Okay. So what seems clear is that that something happened to late night TV that was the same as what happened to cable news. is, during 2013, 14, 15, it's like, who are we? 16, who are we? What are we about? Does anyone care? Do they need this much news content in their lives? And then Trump came in. It's like, now we're going to talk about Trump all wall to wall all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And it sounds like the same was true for late night comedy as well. Like, who are we? What are we doing? Trump gives us all something to talk about. So I guess the question then is like, would Trump have been, and I mean this like as big a deal negatively, if there hadn't been this entire class of people that were invested in making him a negative big deal to make themselves a big deal in response? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it is a fascinating like study of their estimation of him, and also it like we realized at that point that these shows became extensions of the news networks because they were all hated the same thing. And so it wasn't jokes about the Kardashians or whatever anymore. It was all like explicitly like, this is White House. We're talking about the White House constantly. We're talking about presidential politics because that's where the threat was. But yeah, you could see the kind of the rabid hatred slowly turn them into like unfunny people. In the same, like Edwin Friedman, I love Edwin Friedman, but he talks about how you can gauge the anxiety level of a society or of a family or of anything like that based on its capacity to be playful. So that playfulness and anxiety are like a seesaw effect where you can't, if you are anxious, then you're going to be less fun. And if you're fun, then that actually chases away quite a bit of anxiety. And so you see that with TV, the funny goes out. Whereas I think, so it's kind of this you can see during like the Obama years, these guys basically felt safe. And so any of the political jokes didn't have to be very high stakes. None of them saw themselves as saving the country or like fighting Satan. Whereas what they saw themselves then as doing, they felt we are now on the front lines. And as soon as comedy becomes like, I've talked in this interview about like how potent I think it is and how potent I think the like making funny stuff is. But as soon as comedy becomes self-important, then I think it's way gone. Like it just goes out the door. And so I think like Colbert and Kimmel and those guys way overestimate the, their own effectiveness or their own power in being able to do this stuff, when really what they're doing is just relaying all the opinions of the people who are more powerful than they are. Because if they feel like there's always the like punching up aspect of comedy where you want to be the rebel, you want to be the guy in the back of the class, you want to be the jester who can make fun of the king or whatever, and that's what people think of themselves as being. But what they're actually doing is just fighting the like person that's getting everything taken away from him. So like they're laughing hard at a guy who ran for president and for all his trouble got like prosecuted for years and now is getting like, could get thrown in jail. But like they're beating down a guy who's actually below them in the societal hierarchy, but that helps them hold on to their jobs. And they still get to feel transgressive. They still get to feel like, oh, I'm the punk rock guy because I'm fighting Trump. He was the president. He has a lot of power, but he's not really the guy in charge of everything. So yeah, it's fascinating to like think of the psychology of these people who come out every night and are, I don't know. They think they're doing one thing when they're doing something else, and most of the country is understanding that they're not. Is understanding that the actual reality instead of whatever is going on in their head.
That's so interesting because you're right. Like, how can they possibly conceive of themselves as the comedic underdogs, right? When you represent the regime.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'd never really thought of it that way before. It's like, how can you possibly consider yourself an underdog? You are literally the empire.
Yeah. Well, and if they weren't, if they actually did anything to risk their careers, then they would lose all their advertising money. If they did something that was really transgressive to the culture that they were living in, then they wouldn't have their jobs. But for some reason, that cognitive dissonance of I am on the cutting edge of fighting comedy, but actually also all of my opinions are the same opinions of every major pharma company,
Yep.
and the same opinions of NBC Universal all the way to the top. And I have my complaints about Letterman. I used to watch Letterman every day. Huge Letterman fan. I have my complaints about him. But what it was great about him is whatever network he was on, he would always make fun of the network. Because he would make fun of the TV shows that were on the network. He would make fun of the executives by name on the show. So like when he was on NBC, he would like talk bad about NBC and how lame it was. When some new company bought NBC from RCA, he would make fun of the idea that they were, So it was actually like to a point where there was some amount of risk involved, and he ended up like leaving NBC because of the tension that it created while he was there. But yeah, these guys still have jobs. They're not in any danger, and they get to just kind of I don't know, rake in their millions of dollars and still think like, oh yeah, we're fighting the system. But yeah, they're totally embedded in it, and yeah, I don't know, those like I said, the psychology of that person is fascinating to me.
So maybe what we can do is we can talk a little bit then about David Letterman and Jay Leno and Johnny Carson and some of this era of comedy that preceded where we're at now, because I think there are a lot of people who really just started paying attention to comedy in the post-Trump era, when comedy stopped being funny and started being overtly political.
It's
but
a
there
shame.
was a whole it is but there was a whole era where comedians were actually funny, even the political ones, like a George Carlin, nakedly political comic, but at least he would make you laugh,
Sure.
Made me laugh. And of course, and there were pre-political comics as well. So maybe we can talk about some of those and remind people of the good old days.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my favorite stand-up will always be Norm Macdonald. And it was mainly because I think he like had a good head on his shoulders, knew how to like tell the truth in a really brutal way, but also to not be, he was a guy who understood. I watched, there was a great interview of Norm where he's talking to his sister-in-law on Canadian television. His sister-in-law was a Canadian television presenter. And she says something about like, will you ever make a Trump joke, or will you ever do like Trump humor or stuff like that? And he was talking about how it's kind of easy. And what he said is that that Trump is often, when he's being ridiculous, he's often doing self-parody. And that when you start parodying self-parody, then you look like an idiot. And so that was the most succinct way to describe exactly the problem that was going on around him. But he saw that and it's just bad comedy. So he was making a judgment about, oh, your instincts are bad. You're following the wrong path on how to make a good joke. If you want to hit somebody, hit them for real things, and not like when Trump is being bombastic because that's like a joke. Like when he's talking about himself in the third person or doing something goofy like that. Why make fun of somebody who's making fun of himself, or at least is like, again, doing self-parody. But yeah, Norm was always great, and Norm did get political, but it was usually just sort of like cutting through the crap kind of political, so that when it his whole OJ saga of him on Saturday Night Live, he was the Weekend Update guy when OJ was going through the trial, when the verdict was handed down, and he did not let up. And it wasn't like presidential politics in the same way, but there was an actual like huge political force in America that wanted people to say, no matter what, that OJ should get off, even if he did it, or like there was actually quite a bit of pressure on from the network, and quite a bit of pressure from just generally the culture. You don't want, people were calling him racist, people were doing all sorts of things. And Don Ohlmeyer, who was the president of NBC at the time, was close friends with OJ. And so he had every incentive to stop making those jokes, but he didn't. And Jim Downey, who was the writer there at the time, the head writer of Weekend Update, they were gonna fire Jim Downey. They were gonna fire the head writer and leave Norm on, because they didn't want to lose him because he was successful and good. And so they were going to blame it all on the head writer. And Norm said like, no, if Jim's not here, then I'm not here. So they fired them both. And so you have a guy with a lot to lose, and like ends up losing it because he did his job. And doing his job meant making fun of actual powerful people and just saying true things. There was a great Norm, like when the verdict was handed down that he was not guilty, that OJ was not guilty. Norm came on and just said, well, ladies and gentlemen, murder is legal in the state of California. And that was like again, just cut through everything. It was well crafted. It was like, and that was the case with a lot of his OJ jokes and his other kinds of jokes. But you can find huge compilations of his really politically incorrect stuff, which wasn't popular at the time. So the political correctness has been around for a long time. And he had, again, every cultural reason to stop doing what he was doing, to be safe. Political correctness wasn't to the point that it is now, so he was still able to say it on there. But he had plenty of pressure. So yeah, Norm will always have a place in my heart, not just because of the courage. It feels strange to say the word courage when you're talking about like a nightclub comic, but he actually was just gonna say the thing that he thought, and also just the skill. He everybody in comedy will acknowledge Norm Macdonald, best stand-up, or at least among the greats. So anyway, I have loads of respect for him, and I think he was. I think it's obvious that he was a secret right winger. He was a Christian, and like I said, just very, very cool guy, rough guy. So if any of your listeners don't listen to it with your kids in the room or whatever, but yeah, it's worth going down that rabbit hole. He's the best.
Makes me think of Dennis Miller. Dennis Miller was the Weekend Update guy when I was a kid, and I loved the Dennis Miller. What's a kid doing enjoying Dennis Miller? But there was something about the way that he put it. It was just he had this style, and then he disappeared. Dennis Miller he's vanished from the stage. I don't know. Is he around? Does he still do comedy at all? Or
he does a radio show, or I think he used to do a radio show. I wish I knew exactly what he's doing right now. But for a long time he did a radio show, and then that transitioned into a podcast. But he's very talented, and he was Update before Norm was, and then Kevin Nealon was after, but yeah, Dennis Miller, is kind of Fox News conservative guy, and got kind of exiled into that, where he would do weekly spots on the Bill O'Reilly show. After all that, but and that's where I found out about Dennis Miller. My dad watched Bill O'Reilly every night, and I would watch when Miller Time came on. So when they always had a Dennis Miller segment, and Dennis had some prepped punchlines. I didn't understand any one of them, but it was the most opaque references. But yeah, that's Dennis. And what I love about Dennis, if you listen to him talk about how to write a joke, or how his process for everything, or I've heard him say something about rhythm jokes, where it doesn't have to really make sense. He just needed to get somewhere. He needed to get off of the topic to get somewhere else. And so he's so that's kind of a rhythm joke. Or I love that category of
sure.
Oh, I didn't know how to transition out of this, so I just kind of went ba 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 ba, and then we're out. But yeah, Dennis Miller has a musicality to him that is just so fun to listen to. No matter, even if you don't understand exactly what's going on, you want to laugh and you want to understand it, which is any kind of comedy that can make you sit up and go oh, I wish I got that. I think that's an achievement, and you get that with. You got that with a lot of Jewish stand-ups, where they would use Yiddish terms in their jokes, and so you had a lot of people sitting up and going I wish I knew even what that meant. And so people would try to even understand. But yeah, I think that's always I don't know. I think that's an achievement where you where at some level somebody wants to even get your little in jokes. Yeah,
I think it's making me realize. I hadn't actually put these pieces together, but the history of topical news comedy goes much further back than I had realized, because you have this lineage of Weekend Update going all the way back to 1970s Saturday Night Live, which of course was legendary. I think Jim Belushi, Jane, you ignorant slut, and all that, and you roll that forward, to all the way to some of the late night guys, but then also you had Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert this whole big tradition that these guys have inherited now almost feels like they're squandering it, right? They're wasting it in a way.
Yeah. Well, like back in the day, like back in late night, or back in like the Saturday Night Live Weekend Update stuff, there was always set up punchlines, and nobody was trying to figure out what the beliefs of the anchor were of Weekend Update.
That's right.
It was always just about like, and they weren't putting those on display quite as much, and they were. I mean, all the bias was there, but it wasn't about that. It was just like everybody was speaking from their like admittedly terrible worldview and admittedly terrible way of thinking about the world, but once in a while they would land on something true, and when they did, man, that really hit. And you could admire the like skill that it took to get there, even if you disagreed with the like underlying subtext of everything going on. But yeah, there was none of the guys got into it for I don't know. They didn't get into it like to express their political opinions. And I don't think even Colbert did. I think Colbert was like a guy who wanted to get into comedy and then ended up getting into political comedy, and then now is like a voice for a particular like political persuasion. But now, like, I mean, we talked about Jon Stewart earlier. Jon Stewart began really started enhancing the research departments of his late night show. So he just, his research department just became huge, and they were the ones, like, Jon Stewart became famous for these montages of clips where back in the day, before you could search all this stuff online, they would tape every cable news network and like find, oh, I think I saw somebody say this at CNN, on CNN at 8 a.m. Oh, cool. We'll scrub through our tapes. So they had like tapes recording each one of these. Huge research staffs trying to grab all these clips, writing all these things. And so these research teams then became a huge part of turning it in. So like there were no research teams on like most of these late night shows. And if they were, there was a research team that would just go out and try to find setups. So they would go like, here are 20 things that happened today. Can we find one setup, 100 setups, give me and write a bunch of punchlines for those. We'll weed it down and we'll turn it into something. But now, late night before was like one setup, one punchline, maybe like 3 at tops, as to how many punchlines per setup. But yeah, Jon Stewart was the guy who transitioned late night from being something that turned it into something that was one topic for 10 minutes or 8 minutes, where it was a real breakdown. And that's more of what I'm doing. So I'm making fun of him and making fun of the transition, but that's really the kind of animating force of what I'm doing as well. So yeah, it was a time where like everybody who got into Saturday Night Live back in the 70s was from National Lampoon, and they were people who were Harvard Lampoon people, and it was just guys who wanted to perform. There were guys who wanted to write comedy. That was it. So they were confused about the world, and that showed up. But you could, like, when you walked away from it, you were trying to figure out if it was funny or not, and that was the arbiter, like that was the standard that everybody used. Whereas now it's always been easier. Everybody's always had the card to play, like, oh, I'll just say something everybody will agree with, and then everybody will clap for me. It's not something brand new, but it is something that everybody's leaning on now, so that you're not necessarily depending on the craft of somebody trying to put something together, but like, Colbert said something bad about unvaccinated people, all right, yay, I'll clap.
Yay.
So like it's always been there. And like that was, Norm talked about that in his memoir, which not really a memoir. It's the kind of memoir where he like dies and meets God halfway through. It's like it's a weird little thing. But in his memoir, he does talk about a Weekend Update. People were there was a time where they wanted somebody just said, like, we're never going to go for applause. If we have a choice, we're never going to go for it. We're like, and Jim Downey talked about Norm, that Norm was always the guy who, if the joke got a huge laugh, but he didn't feel good about it, he would always cut it. He's like, I don't like that joke. I don't like that laugh. Even if it was a huge one and it was like everybody would love it. He's like, I don't want that one. I don't want that laugh. And it doesn't seem like that's not. I mean, when you're very talented like Norm is, and when you have a ton of writers like Norm, like the Weekend Update crew did, then they were able to turn down stuff. And then just sub in something else. They would rather get a laugh they believed in, laugh for a joke that they liked, than a cheap laugh for a joke that they were like, I don't know. We're I don't know. Like I said, cheap. I don't want to. They didn't want those cheap laughs, which I liked. I like those guys.
Yeah, they wanted to edify and inspire, and they didn't want to be maybe bitter or shrill. Or there's a way in which like speaking truth to power has a necessarily combative kind of quality to it, but you don't want the audience to walk away feeling ugly as a result of it.
Right.
And as a comedian with the ability to kind of, it's a form of, I don't want to, hypnosis isn't the word, but I can't think of a better word at the moment. You want to handle that responsibility lightly.
Yeah.
Because you can really shape people with comedy.
Totally. And I mean, back to the point about playfulness, there's a certain kind of humor that really can't be done now. That when you watch back to like Saturday Night Live in the 90s, back to Jim Downey. Here, I feel like I'm just talking about all my little weird pet things that I like.
No, this is great.
But back to Jim Downey, he did a great sketch called Change Bank. And if anybody hasn't seen the Change Bank sketch by Jim Downey on Saturday Night Live, it's brilliant. And it's just silly.
I'll put it in the show notes.
There we go. Please go watch it. But it's just silly. And it is not, there's nobody's like trying to, it's not, it was, you watch it and you go, the reason it couldn't be made now, and it's not like Blazing Saddles can be made now. It's not like, this is too offensive. It's just like, it's the kind of place that your mind doesn't go if you're anxious all the time. And if you're scared that like fascism is going to take over America tomorrow, then you're not going to sit around and go like, I have this like silly idea for a Change Bank sketch. But yeah, like the kind of movies that couldn't be made now, like people talk about that a lot, where it's like, I wish, Blazing Saddles could be made, or like Tropic Thunder or whatever.
Airplane.
Yeah. Like when people have those examples, they tend to be because they're too offensive or like too politically incorrect. And that annoys me too. It annoys me that like the politically correct stuff, it like is a hindrance to creativity. But anxiety is a huge hindrance to creativity. And so like silly stuff can't make it. And like if Conan were making his show from the 90s now, it wouldn't be near anxious enough. It wouldn't be near like abrasive enough, because we're just in a different time. And I at some level wish that like there was an opportunity to make stuff and people were still doing that, because I loved it. I was such a fan of it. But we still have those, we still have the YouTube clips, and it's in the show notes, so everybody go watch Change Bank. But yeah, we still have them, and yeah, I kind of, what I want like, obviously I want a healthy society, for lots of reasons, and for us to be on the same page about a lot of things for a lot of reasons. But one is it just like opens people up in a huge way. So like obviously a personal psychology, you can escape that. Like you can escape the anxiety that's around you constantly, individually, and you can do that in maybe like a small crowd of people that are, these are the people I talk to, and they're not anxious, and so you can be more creative and you can make more cool stuff. But generally, the vibe of our culture right now is not one that's really conducive to people just kind of letting their minds go to like a really funny place. It's not good for creativity, and I think that's as much to blame as political correctness as such, for like the lack of creativity, and where late night goes, and I think where Hollywood goes, comedy generally, people can like. Comedy movies are things that people aren't really making now, because it feels frivolous, because the world's going to end. And why would we make I don't know, why would we make a $4 million comedy movie when fascism is going to take over America tomorrow? But yeah, I think that's a problem. And I think so like I want societal health for lots of reasons. One of them is the comedy's going to be way better, and the narratives are going to be way better. People are going to be writing and working hard. I don't know.
That's funny that you say that, because it speaks to something that I couldn't put words to, which is sort of yes. Let's get our product placement in.
Yeah.
Which
everyone like and subscribe. Wade Show with Wade. And Reformation Coffee.
Sub-free.
There we go. Sub-free.
ReformationCoffee.com, sub-free, one free.
There we go.
12-ounce bag of coffee. Ooh.
So good.
Exactly. So I've noticed the same phenomenon in music. It's almost like, can we just be free to listen to music these days, or does everything have to be political? Like, can we let go of the world for 30 seconds to just enjoy something, right, or does everything always have to be like, the world's going to end?
Right. Yeah, well, music is totally that, and it's just a symptom of the broader like politicization of everything. So when everything gets politicized, that means that everywhere is a fight, and so like you can't really go. There are very few places you can go where it's not a battleground, and that's an exhausting place to live. Like that's an exhausting place to be. And so like the pop music that's out now, then everybody's like trying to figure out all the like evil things in the new Taylor Swift album, and I'm sure there are plenty. I haven't listened to it, but like it's because the like culture war stuff is real. Like there are some gross things that are happening in the culture. Then like anything that comes out is at some level participating in that. I don't believe in moral neutrality. I don't believe in like institutional neutrality or anything like that. But I do believe in the kind of institutions where everybody's on the same page. So like I believe in like unified institutions and like people who are trying to make stuff out of the same kind of worldview. And that seems to be something that I don't know, that's a way forward. It's not let's get back to neutral, but let's get back to like good. Let's try to make something good and get everybody on the same page, and then we can all kind of work with the same assumptions. But like because music, comedy, movies, entertainment is politicized because everything is, and we all kind of have been aware that things have become battlegrounds when we didn't realize that they were battlegrounds before. It's just that now we're kind of losing them. And so like at the time when we've basically lost all these places, then we realize like this is kind of, the enemies planted their flag and said like, this is ours. Then we realized, only then do we realize, oh, we're at the end of the battle. And I think that's sad. It's like, it's not something, I often think about like people like Jim Downey, who was, I don't agree with him on everything, but he was a like conservative guy. He would write for some conservative magazines. He would show up on the Dennis Miller Show and come in and do like political stuff. And so he was a guy, and he was head writer of Saturday Night Live for years. And I think about that guy, and like that guy, no matter how talented Jim Downey is, he's not getting into Saturday Night Live because, well, that's a battleground. And even if he got like 4 jokes on every week, it would still be like, well, the show itself is like hates him. And so Jim Downey, if Jim Downey couldn't get a job there, and it's not because he's too, like, it probably is like private thoughts politically correct, because the jokes, again, like nobody watches Change Bank and goes like, get this right winger out of here. But he was just very talented, and if he were any worse, if he were any less talented, then he wouldn't have made it. But yeah, because it's a battleground, we're like kicking out a lot of talent, and we're not, I don't know. It's in a bad way for lots of reasons. But one of them, is that anxiety and the kind of, I don't know. There's the hopelessness and the like fighting and the like pugnacious attitude that a lot of people have. Yeah, there aren't very many there used to be some cultural like points where you could go and maybe get away from that for a second. But sadly, not so much anymore, unless you have a pretty robust community.
Mm-hmm. So let's shift this then to sort of talk about what you're doing with the Wade Show, because I agree with you that there's no such thing as neutrality, but I think that there was a time where Christians were willing to look at various culture outlets in America and say, okay, Saturday Night Live is not Christian, but at least they're not coming after us, right? And now with everything becoming hyper politicized, with Christians being in crosshairs, now it's like, well, we didn't want to have to do this, but now we're going to do this. Okay, if we're going to turn comedy into a battleground over, I guess, religion or religious informed values, then let's go there. And that's sort of what you've stepped into.
Well, I hope so. And I think there's
I mean, maybe not overtly, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Well, I mean, I hope that what I'm able to do is do something that makes sense now. Because, you know, even though I wish that I could write stuff like Change Bank. From a skill level, I'll never be as good as Jim Downey. But like, I love the era that you could be a little more like frivolous and silly, and like the joke was the joke. But yeah, what I hope to do with the show is to try to make something that is recognizes that we're in a hyper-politicized age, and nothing can really stay entirely out of that. And so even jokes from the 90s where you watch these stand-ups and they're talking about like, you know, men are like this and women are like this. And you're like, oh, that sounds subversive. That sounds like if somebody did that, if somebody did that now, then it would be categorized as like right-wing comedy. When
Bill Burr, basically.
Yeah, there was a lot of that with Bill Burr. And yeah, Bill Burr is a funny case study. But yeah, I what I hope to do with this show is recognize we're in a political time. My show is going to be political, and not everything has to be about presidential politics or about elections or whatever. But like, hey, if this is what it's if this is the kind of fight we're in, then I'm happy to do that. And hopefully bringing some of the love of that, the love of the comedy and the love of that history with it, so that it's not just like I think there are some. What I don't want to do is like I'm a right wing hyper political guy, and so I got to figure out how to put some like comedy sprinkles on that. So my hope is to like try to do the thing that comedians are doing and do it from my own perspective.
So you actually brought up a question that I wanted to ask, which was so you're in this tradition of topical political, comedy, right? In an age of anxiety. And that's the need, that's the moment, that's the, I guess in a sense, an open door. But you said that you would like to do more Change Bank style comedy, sort of if you could. I've never seen Change Bank, but I'm familiar with the kind of comedy, like this is just about laughing and having a good time. Like a good example is the movie Mrs. Doubtfire comes to mind.
Okay.
Like, yes, of course, you could use that movie to make all kinds of like hyper political points about all this stuff, but like, really, like, can we just laugh our way through this film? It can be, it doesn't have to be this way, but then there's also this category of stuff that it's just fun and let's laugh for the sake of laughing.
Yeah. Well, I've been surprised. I mean, you look back at, one of my kids' favorite movies is WALL-E, the Pixar movie. And you watch it now and you
political.
Go like, it's like, you watch it and you realize this is kind of right wing. Like this is kind of like you're like, but it only is because like every other version of it, every other way of thinking about it, like every other way of thinking about these issues is like totally gone now. And so like you couldn't say that, but but WALL-E itself is something that fit there because it was kind of reasserting normalcy at some level. It was just kind of like a portrayal of normalcy, and it actually like. Just this kind of like a guy who's supposed to be cleaning up things, and like the entire resolution of the movie is a guy like turning the ship off of autopilot and just being like, no, I'm the captain of this ship and I'm going to take it back down and we're going to retake Earth. It's like, oh dude, like, we ruined the planet and we like ran away from it and we're all fat and watching our screens. And now we're going to take it back and we're going to be human and we're going to walk around and not sit in our chairs. It's like, dude, let's WALL-E the right wing, propaganda, but like
right wing robot.
WALL-E the right wing robot. But like what I love about that though, is it doesn't talk about anything. It's just reassertion of normalcy done by very talented people. So Andrew Stanton directed it. Ben Burt was the sound designer on it. It's extremely well done. It's Pixar. They're going to make it good. But like, I think sometimes when people back in the day would make what I would call right-wing art. It came out in 2007 or 2008, I think. Yeah. But like, I would call that a right-wing movie. But what they were doing was just speaking normally. It was the kind of dystopia that was just like, oh, I actually just love the planet, and it seems like we're being lazy, and it seems like we're like messing up our world. And so like maybe we should like stop being lazy and take it back and start like, again, reasserting humanity, reasserting a man and a woman, even though they're, again, male and female robots. But like it's again, the kind of right-wing art that's not overtly like talking about civil war or doing some kind of like particular. I don't know. It's something that could be done, and it's something that has been done, but like it's making its case, and it didn't feel at the time like somebody like made fascist art or whatever. Nobody like called Wally fascist or whatever. But it was, yeah. Again, the reassertion of normalcy, I think, is enough, especially if you're telling a story, and if you're making a joke that like can at some level feel just like a silly joke. At some level, there's something assumed there. So like if there's a healthy foundation of life and like what men and women are like or whatever, then you can make what feels like just a kind of anodyne observation turn into something very funny. Like again, the observational comics back in the day would. But yeah, like because we're afraid to go places, and also because we don't really even know. Again, we're so like torn up about what's possible to even joke about. Then yeah, like why would we joke in such a tough time? It's almost like learning in wartime. You know, like have you read that C.S. Lewis essay? Anyway, it's a great point about where he's talking to I believe undergrads during World War II, and it's just talking about the. It's great. But he's talking to them about like this. There's a war on, and the best thing for you to do is to be right here, and doing this because we have to have something, and we have to have like once the war's over, then we have to have something that we have to have a society that we're still building, and I mean England was basically crushed after the war, but the fact that there were still people after that could continue to build lives was the result of people actually just trying to live life, trying to like they're out there protecting something, and we have to like have it in order for that to be worth anything. At least that was his argument in the essay. But I think it's related to that. I think there's a sense that people like, why would we do anything so frivolous during wartime? And it's like, well, we might as like nothing. I've used this example constantly of Robin Hood, where it's like there's a certain amount of like fighting that he does, and it's not an anxious fighting. You admire him for his clarity of mind. He knows that Prince John is not the rightful king. He knows that King Richard is going to come back someday, but he also knows that in the meantime, I'm living out in the woods, and I've got my buddies with me, and we're going to keep like sticking it to Prince John. That's and like so he's not the kind of guy who is sitting around like whining about it. He's just like things are really bad. Robin Hood's going to have a great time, and he's the guy who with the like the spirit of it is much more fun, even though things are really ugly. And that to know that that's possible, it requires just a wild amount of psychological health that I don't think many people have. And so like even having heroes like Robin Hood just shows us, hey, we can actually do stuff like music. We can sit down and learn how to play the guitar, or we can sit down and learn how to play the piano, even though that doesn't feel like, oh, it's well, there's this guy out here and he's on the news, or he's the guy who's in politics or whatever, and so he's doing the real fight. But there's something we have to be able to preserve. Something we have to like. There are people out there fighting. They're on the front lines of whatever culture war, political war. But what they want when their fighting is done is for there to be a society left, and that is worth preserving. So why destroy the thing that they're fighting for?
Mm-hmm. So you said a wild amount of psychological health, and you talk about a couple different things. A wild amount of psychological health that one has to possess during wartime. And I think the question that raises for me is, I think that there are people who haven't yet acknowledged like what time it is, right? You mentioned this in your Constitution video, like, no, it is wartime, right? And so in order to properly relate to the moment, you have to be able to perceive it as wartime, and then you have to go through that whole journey to have psychological health to be able to laugh again. But people won't even take that first step to recognize that we are a war. Like there's this resistance to acknowledging the uniqueness of the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think that there's a people know themselves at some level, and they go, well, if I believed that, then I would lose all hope. So with the Constitution is Dead video, then I think a lot of people reacted negatively to that because they've always thought of the Constitution as their secret weapon. And so if the Constitution's dead, then I got nothing. And so like, and I don't agree. I don't think that that's the, like, I think there are plenty of things to love about America, and plenty of reasons to be patriotic, even if we don't live under that order anymore, that constitutional order anymore. But they've thought of that document again as the thing that they can use to fight back. But if they can face that, and if you know, hey, I can get through this on the other end, and it's going to be fine, and at least I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to try to figure out how to make sure my family's okay, then that's where you got to go. So yeah, if you can't, I mean, we've got the Leadership and Emotional Sabotage book here, and I'm a big Edwin Friedman fan, but his concept of being well differentiated is not. Is all like if you're having to lead through a really messy situation, then it really will do you no good to not acknowledge the like severity of the situation. But if once you've acknowledged it, then you can see it as something outside of yourself and something that you've got to like. You can I'll figure out what to do. No, I'll know what I can do and know what is out of my hands. But yeah, it doesn't do you any good. It actually is possible to see how bad things are, and to also go, okay, it's my responsibility. I'm going to take the responsibility to make this better. But yeah, I think like broadly Christians are just afraid of realizing how bad things are, especially in kind of the more optimistic, more like people maybe with an optimistic eschatology. People have more of that kind of thing. They might not be okay with saying like not be okay with acknowledging how bad things actually are. Now. So there's nothing contradictory between saying that things are really ugly here, things are really ugly and bad now, and I can still work, optimistic or not, I can still be faithful during this period. But yeah, I do think that people use optimistic eschatology as a way of like getting out of uncomfortable realizations and also getting out of some responsibility. So I think some people will like say, well, things are going to turn out fine. And, God's going to save the world. People are going to be evangelized and everything's going to be great. I'll just sit on my hands in the meantime, and I'll just trust. If I just sit here and trust in postmillennialism, then I'm going to be okay and everything's going to be fine. But I think that's a mistake tactically, and also just not a good reading of postmillennialism. Not a good reading. Right. It's not a good statement of that eschatology. Either way, it's no eschatology should give you permission to be unfaithful or permission to neglect something that matters, especially like neglect your duty.
And I'm glad you said that, because that was kind of my feeling about people who have a more pessimistic eschatology, is that somehow both of these eschatological positions can be flipped in on themselves to kind of say, well, Jesus is going to come back soon and going to make it all okay, so I can withdraw from the public square and retreat into my basement bunker, right? Yeah. Or also just kind of trusting that the Constitution will save me at the same time. It's this weird contradiction.
Right. The Constitution is going to draw me to heaven. Right, yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's like the Constitution with like a big S on its chest or something like that. It's going to fly in and bail us out. But yeah, there is also a way that the postmillennial position can be like, well, I mean, God's obviously going to make it all work out for America. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just how it is. Like, well, neither of those might be true. Like, we might actually have something to go through here, because that's the biblical pattern. Like, you read the Old Testament, you see, like, the Jews went through it quite a few times, right? Because of their faithlessness. And are we experiencing something similar now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's true. Yeah, I think any category of theology, you can abuse it. And so, like, you can abuse true theology, you can abuse false theology, whatever you believe about eschatology. Again, it doesn't give you any kind of permission to sit on your hands or to despair. So, like, you can, and it also doesn't give you permission to not acknowledge again how bad things are or how like ugly something's gotten, because like you can, but you can. It is possible to retain your faith through realizing that, and it is possible to retain your sanity and like health and again playfulness through all this. But yeah, I think that's the place that I've been able to see at least comedy help in some of the things I'm doing. Hopefully the spirit of the show is much more of an entertainment kind of show, so that people can again watch and go, hey, the Constitution's dead, and I'm not sitting there with like my eyebrows like this. But I don't know. I talked to one of the guys. Somebody on Twitter said something about like it's the best video about the Constitution, including like fish and hot dogs. It's like jokes about fish and hot dogs, or whatever. Or like they're saying like you're treating this serious topic. And there's another person who said like you're treating this serious topic with frivolous jokes about Psycho and like Norman Bates's mom. It's like, oh, like we're having fun. Like and I can be like, why in the world would I treat a serious topic with despair if that's not a good way of doing that? Why would I fight in an ineffective way? And why would I, like, if I'm trying to get people over to believe something I believe, then why would I want them to think, well, if I believe that, then I'm going to be angry and sad like Wade is. Like, it's an unattractive thing. And it's also, it's unattractive, it's ineffective, and it's also just not faithful. It's not a good attitude to have. I don't know. Nobody wants to be sadder. Like, well, if I agree with him, then I'm going to be sad. Oh, okay, well, then I'm out.
Well, but I mean, yes, and you can think about what Stephen Colbert or Jon Stewart or any of the late night guys are doing right now is that they're not trying to make people sad per se, but they're trying to push on some sensitive spot, right? Overtly, like in this shrill tone where everyone's like, yeah, those anti-vax people are terrible, right? And it's so like there's a way in which you're maybe adhering to the unwritten rules of comedy that were there until this previous moment. Like we just understood that we don't do that or that we don't have to do that. And it's like, you're a traditionalist in a way.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I mean, the best of the spirit is like the best part of that spirit of comedy is just like, well, no matter what, at the end of the day, it's going to be it may have been a weird day in the news, but at the end of the day, I can laugh about it. And that was the positive of a lot of late night shows. And they knew how to rip apart something and do it in a pleasant way. I think that the spirit of playfulness, has just really gone out. It gets, it takes, no matter how talented you are, and Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart and Conan and are very talented, but no matter how talented you are, your anxiety is going to push out your playfulness. It's going to make you, it's going to like lower your like comedy IQ. It just works that way. And so like that's the spirit I've tried to put together in this show, and I hope it translates. I hope it works. We'll see. If you want to find out if I can do it, subscribe to The Wade Show with Wade. Is it possible?
Yes. Canonpress.com. Yeah, right.
Wade
99.
Wade 99.
So for people Tim Pool just shared your Constitution video. I think it was today, right? And then Alex Jones shared it last week. So world is Wade maxing.
Yeah.
But you started the show, was it 6 months ago, something like that?
I started it last year in February of last year. So I've been doing it for
over a year.
Almost a year and a half. Yeah. It's wild.
Okay.
It's been fun.
So can you walk us through some of the signature episodes or some of the touch point episodes as it's evolved to get to the point now where like Tim Pool and Alex Jones agree on something? Yeah,
it's very fun. That attention from those guys has been very fun. But I like those guys, and I'm glad they've enjoyed the content. The show itself, what I wanted to do originally was more of a I had quite a bit of more setup punchline kind of news monologue where it wasn't one story, and then so I would do several stories within 5 or 6 minutes. And just kind of, here's the news of the week. Here's a quick breakdown of it. And at a certain point, I just started to realize that it's hard to click on something that's about 3 different things. And so if I click, then I assume, like, I want to know what this video is about. And if it's about 3 different things in 6 minutes, then that's too much. So anyway, I started moving more toward doing like one story or maybe 2 stories within, and then try to tie those stories together with a thought. But I realized a lot of the ones that were getting more attention were ones where I started doing this year, which was breaking down and doing like essays. So the first show I did this year was a Sam Francis article from back in 1994 called Anarcho-Tyranny USA. And I just did kind of presented his argument with, trying to bring in contemporary examples and also like, again, make it into a comedy monologue. But it became just like breaking down the essay. That did well. And I was encouraged by that because I assumed people were going to be more hungry for the news type content. But people liked this, again, quoting an essay from 1994. It turned out pretty well. And so I kept doing that this year. And so it's kind of evolved to where that's the main focus of the channel. So most of my videos now, I'll still do a random news one if something big happens. And I try to tie in news stuff with my essays. And so if I think there was one week where there was a big, when a bunch of Boeing lawsuits started happening, and I was able to tie that in with some essay from, whatever, the early 1900s. So just try to figure out ways of bringing things that have benefited me and be able to translate those in an entertaining format. But that's been very fun. And I like the, one of the big ones, as you mentioned earlier, was the Why Everything is Political Now video. Mm-hmm. And that was the first one that Alex Jones at InfoWars shared, which I was very pleased with. And Mark Hemingway and Molly Hemingway have also been very kind with their retweets and reposts of my videos. So there have been a lot of folks, Aaron McIntyre, another one, who just consistently has been very encouraging to what I do. And a big influence on me, a big influence as far as like the translation of something that's heady and might be a little bit hard to grasp, and try to translate that in a way that's informative, entertaining to folks. Aaron McIntyre is great. So yeah, that's been the trajectory of it. It's kind of morphed from more straightforward news topical kind of thing into something it is topical. I do bring in news stuff, but it's mostly about like it's become mostly about tying the news to older topics or things. Mm-hmm. Oh, that reminds me of this Chesterton essay I read. That'd be great. Let's talk about that. So yeah, that's kind of the structure of the channel, and folks have really again latched on to the ones, the friend enemy video, the Why Everything's Political Now. That one was a Carl Schmitt essay, and I've pulled in people like Murray Rothbard, people like Russell Kirk, Chesterton, like I mentioned, and so it's fun just to kind of like plumb the depths of right-wing thinking. This has been kind of happening for a lot longer than I've been around. And I'm working on one on Edmund Burke right now with his takes on the French Revolution. Because again, these are all people who are wise and have been talking about this stuff for a long time. And we as America has kind of lost, like we talk about how conservatives haven't conserved much. That's a pretty common refrain. But one thing that conservatives didn't conserve was conservatism. And so the old school, like the people that people like Russell Kirk just kind of nobody reads him anymore. Same with, again, Chesterton and some of these other guys. And so I think the real, like a lot of people who are right-wing and probably knew where we were headed, have gotten the short shrift from conservatives in the same way that we've dropped the old conservatives, just like we've dropped all the old values that they stood for. But yeah, so that my hope is to present those and be able to again somehow turn a Russell Kirk essay into a comedy monologue. That's my weekly challenge.
So this is what you mean by sort of citing your sources. So
yeah.
It's not just here's a news story that I'm going to kick around for a little bit. It's like here's actual deep thinkers over the generations that have thought about issues related or parallel to this that can help people who are listening and watching understand how to process this moment, because it's really not all that new in some ways. I mean, it's super new in some ways, but in other ways, like conservatives have been talking about this for generations. Yeah.
Well, everything that we're seeing is the end result of a trajectory. And so we might as well listen from the people who saw what was coming and could tell us all the dynamics that were happening when that trajectory was not nearly as clear. People like Chesterton, it's amazing what he was able to see when you see the whole cliche about like if you make one small turn, then you're going to end up 100 miles off course. No matter how the further you go, the further off course. Chesterton was a guy who saw that 1 degree turn and said, "Guys, this is where it's headed." and you read back and you go, "How did he know?" It's like, oh no, he was just a clear thinker who could again he had eyes in his head, and somehow he was able to track stuff way better than we can. And so we can learn that, and we can see little ways in which we might go wrong, and obviously big ways in which we have gone wrong. So yeah, I want to incorporate that's the conservative in me. I'm not sort of a, there are ways in which I'm not a conservative in the sense that I want to restore something that doesn't exist anymore. Like but the conservative in me just wants to hold on to, again, the wisdom that has been built up in the way of doing things. Russell Kirk said, that's back to him, said that like the American order is the result of 3,000 years of human striving, going back to the ancient Hebrews, to the Greeks, and like through all of that. And so if we can take advantage of that, then we can actually build something in the future that feels American because it's taking all of that into account. It's taking in all of that thrust. And so I think that's I don't know, that may not be an exact answer to your question, but I hope it was at least interesting, interesting for the audience.
No, it is an interesting comment because it makes me think about, okay, so if the American experiment is the result of 3,000 years of human striving, then there's something else that has come, it can't be out of nowhere, right? Because liberalism, progressivism, whatever it is, has its own lineage. And so it didn't just like spring out of the ground out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And they have their own texts and stuff like that. So there's this way in which these two ancient traditions are colliding right now in everyone's lives from top to bottom, left and right.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the best way I've been able to figure out how to, or best way I've heard being right wing described in a succinct way is that like right wing means is like pro order and left wing is pro chaos. And so like if you've got this American order that again is a unique thing that's the result again of 3,000 years of people again developing different ways of life and also trying to build on the wisdom of the people that came before them. Then you've got people who want to tear that down. Well, that's a pretty easy thing to do. So in a sense, that's a very old tendency, the entropy tendency, the tear it down tendency. So in a sense, it's very old, but it's new because it's tearing down something particular. It's tearing down this new thing, and so it takes on a new form. But it's an old school mentality that again is applying itself now. But I think that the particular incarnation of it gets a lot of attention because we can talk about Marxism, we can talk about wokeism, and those are again particular incarnations of this thing that is okay. Well, it seems like it's all coming from ingratitude. So if we have this thing that we've inherited for 3,000 years and longer even, if the particularly American order is the result of 3,000 years of human striving, then and I'm ungrateful for it, then it's really easy to grab onto the sin of ingratitude because everybody's got it. So everybody starts from there. And there's also envy and bitterness toward the people that gave us that. So not honoring your father and mother, there's a reason that God included in the Ten Commandments because we're all tempted to not honor our father and mother. And so if we treat our tradition, if we treat our forefathers, our fathers in the broad sense, if we treat them poorly, like that is just acting according to our sin nature. So that's like a blatant way of everybody always there's always something to grab onto when somebody wants to tear down something, and like the ingratitude of the inheritors of the American tradition is always easy to grab onto because we always are pulled in that direction naturally, and yeah, so we've torn it down ourselves, and there's also been again an alien force of like just destruction. Things go that way, but yeah, sin is ugly. I guess that's my conclusion.
I've heard stories. I wonder. I wonder if the distinction that the right wing enjoys order and the left wing enjoys chaos. I wonder if that's valid because I think to see the way the left wing actually does something, because here we are during it's not Pride Month, it's Shameless Month, because it's not Pride that we're seeing, it's shamelessness. Yeah. And so what they're actually proposing isn't chaos, it's actually a hyper order. Like at the end of Marxism, it's not chaos, it's totalitarianism, like Orrin McIntyre's book, The Total State, which I haven't read yet, but certainly it's been highly recommended. So I wonder if what we're seeing with leftism and wokeism is a push, towards such insane levels of order, and what's on the right, the counterpoint isn't necessarily chaos. It's just more like boundaries, right? It's like boundaries versus hyper order. I don't know if those are diametrically opposed enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a certain kind of order that is at heart. I don't know. Maybe we're going too deep into this, but have you seen the movie Brazil? Terry Gilliam, Brazil?
No, I haven't.
No. Okay. That's a great movie about it's about a lot of things, but one of them is bureaucracy. And so there's this guy who finds himself a part of a bureaucracy, and he hates it more than anything. And the one major characteristic of this bureaucracy, it's a sort of dystopian. It's really great. You should go watch it. Okay. But it's this kind of order that's like bureaucratic order that doesn't ever get anything built or done. All it can do is kind of build ugly glass boxes. So you get Gropius building these ugly buildings, and you get again bureaucracies that are impermeable. You can't get any you have to fill out 18 forms before you can get some particular thing done. So that's this
is a documentary.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Yeah,
but it's a great movie, and there in a sense, yes, it's ordered. Because, they have a form for everything, and everybody knows what their job is, and everybody's got their little office and all that. But at bottom of it, I think the heart of it, it's it is this odd blending of the worst kind of order with the worst kind of chaos, because it's not nobody's safe, nobody's happy, and there's no real it's a bureaucratic order. It's it's an ugly soulless order. And I think there's a kind of there's some meme that's it has a tree and then a bunch of leaves branching off of it, and then that's order, and then somebody plucked a bunch of leaves off and just put them all in line, lined up all the leaves, and go that's chaos. So it depends on what your vision of order is. So there's a certain amount of if you lay out all the leaves on a tree and lay out all the branches and sort everything based on color and size and all that, then you could say it's ordered, but it's dead, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't grow anymore. Well, we cut it up and we put it on the table, and so you could maybe order and disorder. You could also sub in life and death, so that if that's Russell Kirk talked about. I keep quoting him, but he talked about how he ends his essay, the order, the first need of all, which is intro to his Roots of American Order. The last line of his essay is that the traveler in the wilderness searches for living order. So what is a tree except for order that's growing and headed somewhere? So it's not the kind of order of a concrete block or a concrete structure or a porta potty sitting out in the middle of the wilderness. Well, if there's some kind of wander in the wilderness, he wants to sit under a tree. Not that there's something else. Not that the other things wouldn't give him shelter, but that is something you can build on. It's something that's living. It's something headed somewhere. And so it's a promise of life. It's a promise of the future. But yeah, I think that there's a dead order and there's a living order, and we don't want the dead one. But yeah, I did a video about order the first need of all, the Russell Kirk essay, on the Wade Show with Wade. But yeah, I think that's part of it. So order, yes, but living order, and there's a dead. Yeah, hyper order might be an interesting way of saying that. That's yeah. Again, fascinating to think about bureaucracy and modern architecture as being ordered, but also unnatural, and I don't know. We may be getting into the weeds. I would just say that there's a certain kind of order that looks orderly, but is also just its own little sub brand of chaos.
It makes me think of That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of what the Nice is doing, is they're taking this small English countryside kind of town, and they're killing it,
Right.
To make it like the surface of the moon. I think one of the characters actually says, right? There's a way in which, yes, it's ordered what they're trying to build,
Right.
but it's also dead.
Right.
So is that
We killed
in
it.
a sense that's chaos?
Yeah.
We killed it,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's everything's in its place, but it's dead.
Right.
So is that order, or is that chaos versus we might say healthy human flourishing,
Right.
which is alive but a bit messier.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Life and death is probably better than order and chaos. It's it's fascinating. I'll think about it more. I'll make a video about it. That's what I'll go do.
Excellent. So, and I think people are looking. So let's go back to the Constitution video again, because I think people feel this attempt to whether it's to create hyper order, whether it's to create chaos, or whether it's to kill something. I think people are all feeling this anxiety of that something valuable is under attack. The attack isn't new. It's been going on for a number of years at this point, but now the illness has become acute. Now you can no longer say that this isn't a problem. You can only cover your eyes and cover your ears so often and for so long until even the reality breaks through that now something serious is going on. And I think people, it sounds to me, they expected that they'd be able to hold up the Constitution as this magical shining talisman that would drive back, like Gandalf on the Pelennor. Well, it's Gandalf on the Pelennor Fields driving back the Nazgul holding the Constitution. So, but you sort of contributed to the piercing of that veil, it sounds like, for some people.
Yeah. Well, and it's never. I hope people don't take that as any kind of insult to the thing. So like saying like you like making fun of the idea that the Constitution is a talisman is not any kind of disrespect to the work of these men 200 years ago. No disrespect. But like if you asked them and if you said, could somebody treat this as some kind of talisman, and okay, yeah, sure, you can do that with anything. But like we get superstitious about stuff. But yeah, it's no insult to the men who were involved. It's no insult to the order. I'm sad that we lost the old constitutional order. There was something that written constitution was trying to preserve that we don't have anymore, because we just lost the will, I think, and because we lost the will in one sense, and on the other side we had people who were actively fighting against that order. And yeah, we're always tempted to throw away something that people have given. But yeah, I hope that it has opened people's eyes to it. But not in a despairing way, and not in any kind of denigrating of the past. Because anything that I want to build in the future is going to have to. I said this in the video, but I want it to be American. I want whatever comes in the future, I want everybody to be able to recognize that's American, and we're still doing 4th of July fireworks in 500 years. Like that's what I want. That would be great. And so I celebrate America. I celebrate anything that we do next. We've just also got to the point of my video was more just that we've got to acknowledge that we're not being ruled by this thing anymore, and recognize again that it's not going to save us. It's not going to burst through the bulletproof glass, start like punching out all the tyrants. Though that would be great. I would love that, but it's just not going to work out that way. And it's going to be all right though. We'll figure it out.
That's not just going to burst out of our chest like Alien either.
Right. Yeah. Well, I hope not.
Well, right. So as this is now percolated into the political, socio-political, even religious environment at the levels that it has, what's been the response that's been coming back to you?
Yeah.
You mentioned that you'd been, I don't know if the word you used was entertained, but you've clearly seen some of the responses to it. What's that been like?
I love it. It's the kind of thing where like I said, I knew it was a hot topic. I knew I wanted to, drop something there was a fight that was already happening, and I think I just dropped something in the middle so that everybody could fight over it. And I think that the response to it, I'm encouraged by, largely because I think that it's kind of, I've gotten all sorts of responses where like I've been accused of being too hard on something or too soft on another thing, and just like it's actually really it's fun to when something does get out there and you're getting every kind of accusation, and also a bunch of like but your people who you trust really like it. That's really fun. And so I knew like within 24 hours or so, all my pastors reposted it. And so like that felt really great. You know, it's like, okay, well, no matter what anybody else says about this video, it's going to be fine. Like my people like it, and we're on the same team. And so, yeah, that's been really cool. It's honestly, like you said, the video is about knowing what time it is. And, I'm encouraged to know that people want to know what time it is and want to talk about it and want to have a further conversation because, like I said earlier, I hope that this video doesn't end the conversation and doesn't become like, oh, he already did all the work. My hope is when people saw it, what they said was, oh man, now I feel like I have a whole reading list. And it's like, that's great. Yeah. I love that. So then they said, well, could you link all the books that you mentioned in the description? I need to do that. But that people wanted that just makes me go, oh, cool. This is like, we're headed in a great direction when people are getting curious. And when the videos themselves are not serving as like me, I'm not using, it doesn't become about like, yeah, the end result of the action is not just like and subscribe to the Wade Show, though I would like for that to happen. Everybody should do that. But the end result is like more work. Like, oh, cool. I have something to do now. And I have responsibility after watching this video, which is more fun.
So you mentioned that all your pastors reshared it. Maybe like there's a way in which this is feeding into the Moscow mood a little bit, because I think the kind of comedy that you're doing does not seem like the sort of thing that's common for evangelicalism for a while outside of the Babylon Bee. But like a lot of churches, a lot of church communities wouldn't support the kind of thing that you're doing in that way.
Yeah, well, I'm honestly very pleased. As long as I've been doing, because I did comedy writing back when I lived in Texas as well, and I had a great pastor there who would watch the stuff that I would do and would talk to me about it. And since being here, I've been able to show my pastors. I do this stuff for Canon Press, and so I've always recognized that I don't want to do any of these things that I'm doing without being under authority, without recognizing that like I can get things wrong. And when you're in creative mode and when you're in like brainstorm mode, you're gonna miss, and it's gonna be kind of messy, and you don't always know editing wise what really works and what doesn't. And so that's why it's encouraging to have that kind of feedback here. And I also recognize it's the kind of place, and being involved in Moscow, I always know that no matter if I get big views or I get small views, I know that my pastors aren't going to factor that into their care of me. Like they're not coming over and going like, well, we got to make sure to not ever tell Wade that he sinned because, well, he gets all these views. And like, I love that. So like, no matter like, and the reason it's funny is because you can't picture like good men doing that. But you can picture like weasels doing that. You can picture weasel pastors just sort of like sucking up to people because, well, he's famous and he comes to our church, and well, and like I'm not saying I'm famous, but I mean like you can picture like weasel pastors at like mega churches who are like, well, we don't want to get this person mad because, well, it's kind of a big deal that they come to our church. But like I love that. I love the accountability. I love being under authority, and being under authority of people that I really trust and I know are good pastors, good men, and will talk to me and engage with the stuff that I'm doing. Always very encouraging. So like that's even if the videos that I do get a handful of retweets or whatever, as long as they're like people I respect and people that matter to me personally, then I go, okay, well, I'm on the right track. If I get a retweet from Will Spencer, then I know I'm doing the right thing.
Every day. Well, so, I mean, there's a way that I think one of the things that people look to Moscow and what they want for themselves is they want that sort of what appears to be like an esprit de corps. Like here we all are, we're all together in this town. We're all here together, and we're moving forward. We're moving the cultural ball forward, and the American landscape, the American political landscape, and the American evangelical landscape. And I think men look around at their church communities and like, well, I can barely move the ball forward in this church, right? Or in this small town. And so like, but there's a way in which all these men coming together in this place can have an outsized impact. Every single one of them, by supporting each other, can really push things forward.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've felt that in a lot of ways. When we moved here, when my family and I moved here in 2021, I took a couple of years off of doing any kind of content because and one of the reasons why is that I really wanted to just be able to sit back and be able to like push and let other people, like show other people the content from Canon Press, the stuff that's been here and they've been making for decades. And so a lot of what I did was trying to work behind the scenes to get stuff out in the open. So trying to grow our YouTube presence and try to get folks, just kind of catch people up with all the, again, amazing material that's been coming out of here for a long time. And so I wanted to insert myself in first as somebody who's here to like, again, serve outsiders by like presenting again the value that I've gotten here. So it's been fun to be able to participate in that after again 2 years of again promoting other people. But that's my heart really is I love Canon. I love the vision that's here, and I love the Moscow in particular. Just I love being here. It's been great for my family. And yeah, there's a positive spirit of, hey, we're all working toward the same things. We want normalcy. We want good stuff. And it's a fun team to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. You have time for just a couple more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So as we discuss all this, if you could have it all your way, and the Wade Show could have the impact that you wanted to have, what would that be? What kind of change would you like to create, or what would you like to create with the Wade Show?
Yeah. Well, if any particular video had the impact that I want it to have, the impact that I want it to have is some of what I was talking about earlier with people walk away from it feeling informed and entertained and curious about follow-up. So it makes them it's something sticks in their head, or like I don't know. I see the Wade Show. I don't use this as a bad word, but as propaganda. I see it as more just like, hey, we're here to like, we're going to communicate things. It's going to be simple, and then there's going to be like, it's a loyalty kind of thing. I'm just expressing my loyalties, expressing my opinions, and trying to get this again high-minded stuff that might be coming out. So again, it's like entertained, enlightened, and also curious for further stuff. When people are in the comments asking questions and going like, oh, what about this? And what this makes me think of that. And what, I love that. I love when something spurs on discussion. Mm-hmm. I said this in the description of my Constitution video. I said something about like, Constitution is dead. And if you don't believe me, just watch the video. And if you still don't believe me, then just argue in the comments. It's really great for the algorithm. But I do love the engagement. And so if I hope to be like, starting conversation, pushing things forward, and also just hopefully modeling a spirit of playfulness.
Mm-hmm. And so, if there's a young man listening right now who's wanted to get into comedy, maybe he's in his 20s, maybe he's in high school, and this is a direction that he sees himself wanting to go in. What kind of advice would you give? What kind of advice would you give to that young man? Based on your experience having gone through this world and now to where you are today.
I would say 20 jokes a day. And like, there are books to read about this. There are books like, there's a book called How to Write Funny by Scott Dikkers, who started The Onion. There are a bunch of other great ones that are just not coming to my head right now. But there's a bunch of great stuff if you really want to get into it. How I want to describe comedy writing or any kind of writing is that it is a trade. Like, if you treat it like a trade, if you treat it like I want to learn this, the less you think of it as kind of like my self-expression and my art, and more of like, I got to learn this, like, this is a weird skill that I want to learn. Like, I really want to learn woodworking, and there's a guy who wants to do that, so I got to learn this. Then the better off you're going to be. So like, if you treat it like a tradesman and you're just like, all right, clocking in 20 jokes, and if all 20 of them are bad, that's fine, and I'm going to turn it over the next day. But when I did this, I wrote jokes. And again, I don't see myself as like the greatest comedy writer ever, but I used to write jokes every day on my lunch breaks. I worked at the call center at Ligonier Ministries, and I would write my monologue jokes every day. So it was just like setup from the news and then punchline. And I'd try to write like 3 punchlines per setup, and then I would get to my 20, and then I'd finish up and eat my little like, lasagna or whatever. And so that was how I tried to work it into my day, because for some reason, I don't know why, I wasn't ever I wasn't gonna go work for David Letterman. David Letterman had already retired, but it's still like, I thought of it as, at the time I just thought of it as a writing exercise, because I've always respected writers and thought like, well, what is a joke but a sentence? And what is like, and it seems like if you're working on a sentence, that you want it to be as punchy as possible. And it seems like it's like a joke is the kind of sentence that has a goal, and it's to make somebody laugh. So like very, very few sentences, you kind of learn how to, hopefully it's turned me into the kind of writer who can be writing in a direction and like pushing people forward and knowing where to put some particular syllable or word in word order. So it's comedy writing is like just like any kind of writing is a weird trade that you've got to be kind of obsessed with in a weird way. And if you find yourself like getting bored by it, then you're not quite ready. But it may not be for you, and that's fine. If 20 jokes a day sounds like I wouldn't even care, or like it's a matter of just like putting in a like weird amount of hours, and then in the end you're still going to write stuff that you don't really like, and you're still going to write stuff that's like some stuff that's going to come to you and you're going to go, that is amazing, I love that, and other ones are just not gonna quite sail. But yeah, I'd say just it's the practice, and it's also just like finding mentors of people that you like. So if you like late night, then watch great late night things. Find their little transition phrases. Again, this is like nuts and bolts stuff, so it may not be super interesting. But like little transition phrases are really helpful. Learning the rhythm of those things, as well as like if you want to be a stand-up, if you like stand-up and want to get into that, then study people who are very good at that. Nate Bargatze is really good. Brian Regan, the kind of obvious example is Jim Gaffigan. I talked about Norm, he's my favorite. But yeah, like there are people who are doing it who are very good, and there are patterns. And it's the same kind of thing with music, where you can learn the instrument, you can learn the basics, but at some level it's about picking up the patterns over the course of years. And that sounds so it's just a skill. So I'm not trying to glorify it and turn it into, again, it's not a special kind of skill. It's just like anything else, where you pick up what you pick up, and it's usually you just kind of, in the same way with music, if you are spending enough time doing it, then you recognize when something isn't going to work, and your radar for, that if I write that out and then I try to perform that isn't going to work. So developing that instinct is also an important part of it. But yeah, if you want to get into comedy, there are ways in, and I don't know about like the comedy business, but if it's something that I don't know anything about the comedy business, but if you love doing it and it's worth it to you, then just do it, and do it a bunch. And it may be that in the end, all you're doing is you just have a really entertaining Twitter presence, and the world needs more of those. But like in the same way that if somebody says like, I love writing short stories, and it doesn't, like, I know I'll never sell them, because short story collections are things that just don't go anywhere anymore. Nobody sells short stories. You don't sell them to magazines anymore like you used to. But somebody just, I love the form. I love Flannery O'Connor. I want to be the next Flannery O'Connor. I want to write the greatest short stories. That's fine. And it may be that like you're the only person who reads them, or you self-publish them. But like it's a form that is really cool, and it's worth doing, worth trying out. But yeah, I feel like I'm now discouraging people from doing it. But it's a very interesting. It's very fun if it only happens if you get obsessed. Like I said, just like anything. If I am a musician, and so like at a certain point I did have to get obsessed with learning to sound like this person, or I would do audio recording. So I would record on my computer and just like study the way somebody did something, and be like, oh, it sounds like the reverb's in this ear, but the signal's here. So how do I get that? And like figuring out little technical solutions to stuff. Yeah, joke writing, it's much more like bricklaying than it is like, I don't know, ascending to the heavens and just receiving amazing comedy. Yeah, you don't like
like
go on
that.
an ayahuasca trip and then just get great jokes. You like for some reason you just got to sit down every day and write these stupid jokes that you hate until you don't.
Don't get me started.
I'm
on
sorry.
ayahuasca.
Yeah, no, I didn't even. I forgot that I was bringing up one of your topics.
Oh yeah, well we can go there. Like I don't know. There are actually on Instagram there are comics that do kind of new age comedy.
Cool.
Ridiculing some of those communities in Los Angeles primarily. Yeah. So sort of like it's funny. But I actually interviewed a comic who that was what he did. Yeah. And so we did a whole bit to begin with. You and I talked about that. And then we did an actual interview. Yeah. And then during the course of the actual interview, I discovered no, he actually believes this stuff. I was trying to square that. Like, wait a minute. I thought together we were going to be, poking holes. And it's like, yeah, exactly. But no, he actually believes this. And that's the thing about that is that they make fun of it from within their own worldview. Weird. Okay, I guess I get it, but there's an uncritical nature to that. I'm not sure what the word is.
Right. Yeah. It seems like you'd take your own jokes to heart at some level. You're like, well, if I'm making fun of this, maybe I'm a dope. I'm making fun of myself.
Yeah, right. Maybe I'm going to make fun of this world, but maybe I shouldn't be in this world. Right.
Well, that's bizarre.
It's a big surprise.
I want to listen to that interview now. Everybody here should go listen to that too. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the one with 7-figure shamanism. Okay. I'll put that in the show notes. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah. I mean, he and I worked together on a skit beforehand, cool. and then we did the actual interview. And as I'm talking to him through the actual interview, it's dawning on me that it's like, wait, he really believes this stuff. Like, what am I going to do? Cool. Like, how am I going to? Yeah. So I did get to preach the gospel to him a little bit at the end. So
I watched a little bit of the clip, and it does seem like it seemed like a funny guy. It seemed like a very talented guy. I'm glad you had him on. That's cool.
Yeah, it was a fun experiment. So I guess then just the last question I have is: are there comedians that are out there working today? You've mentioned Jim Downey and Norm Macdonald, who passed away. Are there comedians that are out there today that are still doing good comedy in this age of anxiety? Yeah. Okay. I mean I'd love to hear some of those names.
I mentioned Nate Bargatze earlier. I think he's one of the great stand-ups going right now.
I don't know how to spell that name. Nate Bargatze?
And then Bargatze. He's very funny. He's a great stand-up. I think he had a special that came out last year on Amazon Prime, but he's got Netflix specials as well. He did Comedy Central for a while. He's such an interesting guy, and I'd love to meet him someday. But he's originally from Tennessee, a small town called I forget exactly what name. Old Hickory, Tennessee. Small town Tennessee guy, and then moves to New York to go pursue stand-up, and really he gets his chops up in New York. And then as soon as he gets to the point where he can, from what I could tell, sustain his family on touring income, he moved back to Tennessee. So I think he's in Nashville now. So he's a guy who loves where he's from, but also he's just very talented, very, very funny, mostly observational stories. And his Comedy Central album, Full Time Magic, that is a great one. That's a great record. But that was, I think, going on when he was living in New York City. He was married, they had a young daughter, and then but as soon as they could, they moved back to Tennessee. And now a lot of his stuff is much more personal and much more family kind of storytelling. But I think he's very talented. He's got a certain his rhythm is really really infectious. He's got a podcast called Nateland. And I haven't listened to the podcast quite as much as I'd like to, but very funny guy. I'm trying to think of other examples. Most of the examples of guys that I think are doing it now that are good. I think Jim Gaffigan is very funny, but he's far from being a right winger. But I think he's as far as the skill goes, I think he's very good. Dave Chappelle's still doing stuff, and he's very talented, very blue, but I don't know. It's kind of it's hard to recommend. But similar with Tim, the comedy right now is in a fascinating place because especially stand up. Stand up is it used to be that stand-up, you would go and you would try to work with a club owner. So if I'm working with a club owner in Spokane, Washington, and I'm trying to book this thing, this night, then I need to go, I'm going to fly to Spokane, I need to get there, and then the next, like Friday and Saturday, I'm doing the morning radio shows to try to sell tickets to my show that night. Whereas now, and Chris Rock would always say, I'll know I've made it when I don't have to do morning radio anymore. And so like that was the level people wanted to get. They wanted to get famous enough to where they didn't have to do morning radio, but that was the kind of grind of a comic. What's happening now is you've got comics now who are like having to grow a podcast presence. And so that's the way they market things. So it's kind of replaced the morning radio. So they grow the audience there. And so you've got kind of some comics that are splitting into comics who are very good at podcasting and may not be as good at stand-up. And there are others who are really good at stand-up and are not as great at podcasting, but they're trying to do both in order to build those audiences. So I think Mark Normand is very funny. I think he's also very blue. And Tim Dillon, similar kind of things. But yeah, again, very talented guys. And guys I love listening to, who and on the weirder side, this is very much on the weirder side, but a guy named Connor O'Malley, I think is like anything he does always makes me laugh, and it's very goofy. It does get blue, but you can usually skip his stuff when he does that. But yeah, Connor O'Malley, Conner, O'Malley. But anyway, like that, there are people doing stuff, and it's very good. And those are people who have influenced me, and not everybody has to watch them, not everybody has to like them. And like I said, if anybody watches those things and goes like, Wade is telling me that it's okay to say this ugly thing that Tim Dillon said, I am not saying that. I'm just saying that there are people who are still very funny and are still doing cool stuff. And I like Theo Von. I like Theo Von a lot. His podcast is good. I wish I could think of more examples, but yeah, people are doing comedy and it's good. But yeah, they tend to be people a lot of times who are outside of some part of the system. So I mentioned Nate Bargatze. He's in Nashville now, and he's not a part of, like, his place is probably not anxious. He's like has a pretty, his storytelling stuff, it seems like he has a pretty normal life other than touring, which I'm sure takes up a lot of his weekends. But yeah, like the more like cosmopolitan comics, or the more like people who just kind of live nowhere and are constantly on the road, that's also, yeah, your comedy kind of gets less grounded in that way. So yeah, I like I said, I continue to maybe I should have just recommended Nate Bargatze, and if anybody in your audience again watches something dirty and then blames me for it, I apologize in advance.
We both take that on. So actually, this reminds me of another question. So the uneasy relationship that Christians have, not necessarily with secular comedy, but with comedy as a concept in general. It almost feels like sometimes maybe it's a lack of playfulness thing, but it's almost like, are we allowed to poke fun at the world? Are we allowed to poke? Yeah, everyone's made in the image of God, but but even though that's true, can I make fun of that person? And it's almost like, it's kind of this strange thing, but it leads to this joylessness. And I'm sure this is something that you've had to encounter over and over again, whether or not blue comics or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, can you make fun of person X because they're made in the image of God? I think that's understandable. There's a certain, I think, naïveté that is particular to Christians, and that's not an insult to Jesus to say that. But I think that I think that what Christians can think is that if this person is presenting as nice, then they're not a threat. And so a lot of times people can really be threats and not make it really obvious. So they're not like, doing Mr. Burns fingers, and they're not doing anything like, but you see it, and if somebody can actually recognize, this person's acting like a bad person, and can say that out loud, a lot of times that will feel like you're the person who drew the gun first, right? So like if somebody's presenting as nice and not and trying to be doing the there's a very like we talk about winsomeness a lot, but like there's a very calculated kind of winsomeness that's really nasty. That can be nasty, but with a big smile and sweet. And but if you hit back and you just go like, oh no, that's not the way things actually are, or like, no, you're just lying to me and you just like want my church to be destroyed, or like, I don't know, you're trying to break down my marriage, or that kind of thing. If you actually sometimes just call things by what they are, then yeah, sure. Like we're not, it may be insulting to somebody, but it's also telling the truth and calling it like it is. So I would rather like tell the truth than lie and be thought nice.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very important distinction of being able to call out, wolves in sheep's clothing, and to be able to do it in a way that makes people laugh and entertains them at the same time. Like that's okay.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's disarming to a lot of folks, because what I recognize in some people is sometimes I'll make a joke or make a video, and some people will respond, like will subtweet the joke. Would be like, oh, this, or like if with the Constitution video, it's like if somebody talked about, well, with all this bad talk about the Constitution is dead, like they're obviously talking about my video but not talking about it, but if anybody watched it, then they would again realize like the first thing they would hear is me making a joke about a fish shooting a dog, and it's like all of a sudden your defenses are a little bit down, and you're like, oh, well, I thought we were going to be self-serious here. I thought we were going to be like, I thought we were going to, again, eyebrows. I thought our eyebrows were going to be like this, but no, it was like, and so I think it's disarming at some level to just again, we're going to have fun here, and that's a much more fun way to make it spirited. I've always admired the kind of debates. I mean, we with Collision, like Doug and Christopher Hitchens' documentary back in the day. That was there were very funny moments in that documentary, and those guys genuinely enjoyed each other, and they had great quips and lines, and in the end, nobody hated each other, and what happened was like they were opponents, and they treated each other like opponents, but they were also having a good time, and that's much more fun, and it's much more rewarding, and it's not as tiring. You don't get quite as tired.
Yeah, there was a way in which there was a spirit about that. Like we can be in diametrically opposed worldviews, and yet we're still men together. Right.
Yeah, men together is a great way to put that, because there's something inhuman about just being like logic choppers, where we have to have everything on a diagram. But like it's much more human, to kind of relate to somebody and use an analogy that's like true to life, and just the kind of things. Again, analogies don't occur to you when you're anxious. Analogies, like even just that little bit of creative thinking, it actually takes some amount of being removed from the situation and start to think, oh, this is kind of like this, and that's again a way of thinking that's foreign to somebody who's again logic chopping and just like can't handle anything that's not furrow-browed serious discussion. But yeah, unattractive, not fun.
Yeah, it's not a debate. Yeah. It's rhetoric, not a debate. Right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, sir. I must say that Ken did a great job finding the correct Wade for the Wade Show.
Yeah. Long audition process, I got to tell you that. Yeah.
So many Wades out there. So where would you like to send people to find out more about you and what you do? And I'll link the Constitution video in the show notes so everyone can watch.
Yeah, so I'm on X at Wade Stotts. I'm also on YouTube, Wade Show with Wade. And our main hub where we keep it, our kind of cancel-proof thing, is Canon Plus. And that's where I post every week there, and we also just have tons of content that have been building up over the past few decades. We got documentaries that come out there all the time. But yeah, just if you want to find my stuff, my Twitter is a good way to see stuff that I'm pointing people to, and that's at Wade Stotts.
Wonderful. May we all begin Wade maxing.
Please, everyone. And if you want a mug, canonpress.com, check it out.